Welcome everyone to International Dark Sky Week. Welcome to it. Today we have a very special guest, Ravis Henry, talking about the connection to the stars, the Navajo cosmos, the perspective, as it says right there, for the sun, moon, and night sky. And again, folks, if you want to check out any more of our events, do go to idsw.darksky.org. If you do have any questions for the Dark Sky staff or for Ravis as we go through, we'll have a Q&A portion at the end of our event, but please do drop those into the chat or into the Q&A function of your screen. If you are looking for captions or you need translation, those settings should be available, but if you do need further support, do let us know in the chat. Otherwise, Ravis, feel free to take it away, and folks, happy International Dark Sky Week.
Hey, Chris, thank you. And apologies, first of all, having a little technical difficulties, but I am here and I'm happy to know that many of you are joined. Ravis Henry Kia Anin Schnedo my Teshkijni Bashish Chin Ashihin Dashichedo Tnasan Dashinale Ado I sit east so Holyegi I den Nasha Kundet and Legish the Chindo Tay has Angishiyahu. Put I Tay ni Tilken Schnedo Nihuka Din the Ne Bilashla in Shem. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from this beautiful world. My name is Ravis Henry, and I am a member of the Navajo Tribe. I belong to the Towering House clan, born for the Coyote Pass-Jemez Clan. My grandpas are Salt People Clan and Tango People Clan. And I originally come from a place called Alamo, New Mexico, but I was born and raised in Chinle, Arizona, where the beautiful Canyon de Chelly is located. That's where I currently work as a National Park Service ranger. And I'm also a traditional knowledge holder, storyteller, practitioner, apprentice with our ceremonies, and an avid learner. So I want to thank the IDA and the organizers for inviting me to tune in this afternoon from my part of the world to share just a little bit on the Navajo perspective of the night sky. About a year or so ago, I was able to share some of these perspectives on a little shorter time frame, talking mostly just about the stars. And I want to elaborate just a little bit more today, talking about the cosmos in regards to what's above us, to the sky above us, and how we as Navajo people see the world and also live our daily lives, being one with nature. So that's what I'm going to share with you all for the next half hour or so. And if anyone has questions or comments, feel free to throw them into the chat. And at the end, we'll try to make some time to visit those questions and comments, and we can discuss a little bit further at that point. But I want to start here. The Navajo word that I started off with when I came on, Ya'at-e. This word here is a word that we use as a greeting when we say Ya'at-e. And John Wayne in his old Western movies kind of ruined this word. He pronounced it Yatahe. So a lot of people come to Navajo land saying Yatahe, but it's actually pronounced Ya'at-e. And this word is a very special word. Many of us today will simply say that it means hello, but it actually means much more than that, and it has a much deeper definition. We use it as a greeting to say hello, but that's not exactly what it means. When we say Ya'at-e, the very first part of the word is Ya. And Ya is talking about everything that's around us, going upwards, above us. It's referencing the air, the wind. It's talking about the clouds. It's talking about the rain, the snow, the lightning, the thunder. It's talking about the sun and the moon, the blue sky, and then further beyond that blue sky into the darkness, to the stars, the Milky Way, and the rest of the universe. And in our language, we call that Yadelchith. Yadelchith is a Navajo word for the sky. And we also identify it as Yadelchith Nihitcha, which then translates to Father's sky. The second part of the word, Ya'at-e, is At-e. And At-e is talking about everything down here around us, the way it is, everything we can physically see, smell, taste, touch, and hear. It's talking about the ground beneath our feet, the sand, the pebbles, the rocks, the grass, the vegetation, the hills, the mountains, the canyons, the mesas. It's talking about the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, everything, including the animals, the insects, all these different things, these beings that are a part of one specific being we call Nahastan. And in our language, Nahastan translates to earth. And we identify her as Shaman Nahastan, which is Mother Earth. So when we say Ya'at the word is talking and referencing Father Sky and Mother Earth. And when we share that word as a greeting or as an expression, when we say Ya'at we're identifying Mother Earth and Father Sky and this place that we exist in. And for that moment, it's like Mother Earth and Father Sky are holding hands. And right there on the palms of Mother Earth, everything is perfect. Everything is harmonious. Everything is balanced. Everything is beautiful and everything is good. And right there is where life exists. And that's where we are. So when we say Ya'at what we're really sharing, what we're really expressing is we're saying that everything that's good with Father Sky and everything that's good with Mother Earth and all the things that are good around me are good with me. And everything that is good with me shall be good with you. So that's what that word actually means and is expressing when we say Ya'at. It's giving notion and connection to the sky and the earth and reminding us of where we exist and where we are today. So one more time, Ya'at to each and every one of you. I mentioned I'm from the Navajo Nation. For those of you who don't know much about the Navajo Nation, we are one of the largest tribes in the United States. There are over 570 federally recognized tribes across the United States. There are hundreds of more that are not federally recognized. There are thousands of indigenous people that have lived or still exist here in the great North American continent. And in the United States, the Navajo Nation is the largest. In population, we have about over 400,000 Navajo people, and we have about 27,000 square miles of homelands that we are able to still occupy and live on. And they encompass areas in northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, and the southeastern portion of Utah. And these are the federal lands given back to us, which are actually about maybe 1/3 of the traditional Navajo homelands, which are bounded by 4 mountains in our stories. And I am coming from Canyon de Chelly, which is almost in the center of this map here, in the center of the Navajo Nation, a place called Seyit in our language. And sharing that we have 400,000 Navajo people in our population today, the numbers are probably higher. I also want to remind folks that I'm only one of these 400,000 people. And I'm going to be sharing some perspectives with you coming from my family and from my mentors, my teachers. And initially, there's many different ways of seeing this world, even amongst our own people as Navajo. So what I want to share with you at this point is that what I'm sharing with you is just one way, and there are 400,000 different ways that we can tell this story. And one of the things I want to touch on first here is the story of the sun and the moon. Many of these stories that we speak about are actually stories that we share in the wintertime. We don't speak too much about them in the summertime due to constellations and due to seasonal norms and also cultural reasons. In the wintertime is when we spend most of our time indoors around the fireplace and we have time to share these stories. It's also in the wintertime that animals are in hibernation and the land is rejuvenating itself by sleeping. The plants disappear, animals go into hibernation and long sleep. So this is a time that we share our stories and we have some of our stronger healing ceremonies. So because of that, we are actually out of the winter storytelling season. So I'm just going to briefly share just a little bit of some of these stories. And one of them that we have is the story of the sun and the moon. And we have the sun, which we call Johona'e, and then the moon, we call it Ehona'e. And in our stories, these are two beings that carry crystals across the sky for us every day and every night. These crystals were made out of quartz, crystal quartz. In our language, we call it saga and dinis. They were created by the holy beings, Di and Diné, the holy ones. The sun was created first, and it was created out of this crystal quartz into a round shape. And on this crystal quartz, they put eyes and a mouth. They gave it horns, and they adorned it with different feathers, and they painted it with white shell and white pigment. And then they put corn pollen at the very bottom of this face that they created, the chin. And as they began to create this being, it became a light form. And it became so bright that they were able to create light from this crystal, and they placed it up into the sky. But they only placed it in one location of the sky to provide light here on Earth. And when they placed it up into the sky, it was stationary, and this light didn't move. So only the people closest to the eastern part of the world had the most light, and everybody else on the western side had minimal light. So the people complained, and the holy people listened. So they relocated that light from the eastern sky to the western sky. And as that happened, everybody on the eastern part of the land began to get upset and wanted that light back. So the holy beings had to decide how they could distribute the light equally across the land. So then they asked for a volunteer, and a young man jumped up and he says, I can help. I can help move this light across the sky for our people. That way everyone will have equal light. So it said that he jumped on his horse, his white stallion, his white Mustang, and he put this crystal quartz into the palm of his right hand, and he jumped onto this horse, and he rode off into the eastern sky on a rainbow, and he began to carry that light, that crystal quartz, across the sky, beginning in the east, going all the way across the sky towards the west. And he became known as Johanae, the sun barrier. With the leftover quartz, there was another small chunk that they were able to utilize. And they said, let's create light for darkness so that our people will be able to see as they navigate across the landscape, and also utilize this crystal quartz to help identify seasons and to move us forward in the different seasons and different times of basically a calendar for our people. So they created a similar design, but this time they adorned it with turquoise and painted it with the color blue. The second time, though, they asked for another volunteer, and this time nobody spoke up until an old man stood up and agreed to carry this crystal quartz on his horse. And this old man was not as strong as the sun barrier. He was much older. He was not as strong, and he wasn't as coordinated because of his age. But he picked up that crystal quartz and jumped on his horse and began to carry that blue crystal quartz across the sky, creating the moon and providing light for our people at night. And he became known as Tehonae. The sun barrier rode strong every morning from the eastern sky and setting in the west in the evening light. The moon barrier would try to keep up. He would ride up at sunset from the east and moving across to the west. But because of his age and his uncoordinated self at the time, he was not able to keep up on the same path and the same speed as the sun barrier. Because of this, the moon barrier doesn't take the same path every night. Sometimes he speeds up, sometimes his horse slows down, sometimes he veers off to the left, sometimes more to the right. And that's how the moon tends to have different cycles. Sometimes we don't even see the moon at nighttime because of his speed and his the route that he's taking. And this is how Johona'e and Tlahona'e and the sun and the moon were created in our stories. And there's one thing that they said, is that every now and then they're going to come around to each other. There's different stories that take place here about the sun and the moon coming together. Today in science, we know it as an eclipse. But as Navajo people, we have different stories for it. We have Atletna'aj, which is one of the translations we have in our language, talking about how the sun and the moon have come together. And then we also identify the lunar eclipse and solar eclipses. And in this, some of our stories, some families may say that for a solar eclipse, it's the death and rebirth of the sun. So they say Johna Edatsa or Johna Edatsa. And in that instance, they say that the sun barrier dies and is reborn to carry light for many more years to come. But in some of our other stories, we talk about how the sun and the moon come together. Not just the sun and the moon, but the sun, the moon, and the earth. And all of these different deities, they reconvene at a certain time for a specific purpose. And we don't always know what this purpose is. We don't always know why they're convening like this. But it's said that whatever it is, it's so important that only the holy beings are at the table to discuss. And many times it's pertaining to us, the people here on earth, the plant beings, the animal beings, the human beings. But whatever it is, it's so important and above us, beyond us, that we have no business looking at it. We have no business trying to hear or partake into this meeting. So there are certain protocols for us as Navajo people when the earth, the sun, and the moon are convening, and what we know as an eclipse today. As Navajo people, we might see this as taboo, but really it's being humble, being reverent, being respectful to the natural order of things that we just have no knowledge, or we're not able to comprehend what's actually really happening between these different beings. So during an eclipse, whether it be a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, Navajo people are taught certain customs. The most important is that we don't look at it. We never look at the eclipse. A second thing is that we don't eat or drink anything during an eclipse. And the third thing is we don't sleep during an eclipse. And part of these are, one, to be reverent. They instill teachings of respect and humbleness, reverence for our people. That teaches patience. And then they say that if you look at it, it can affect your vision, your eyesight. They say that if you eat during an eclipse, it can cause future digestive orders or internal stomach issues or anything pertaining to your digestive system. It can be affected by this. And same if you sleep. And if you are caught up in sleeping or eating or doing the things that we're told not to do, it takes a large ceremony to correct this issue. And many of our people are not very knowledgeable in our ceremonies anymore. So there's a lot of fear and taboos that are built up around these different occurrences like an eclipse. So we have one scheduled on Monday, April 8th, for a solar eclipse to take place over North America. And Navajo land is going to be experiencing partial view of that eclipse. And even though it's a partial view, we're still respecting and honoring that natural order by being reverent, being humble, and keeping quiet and staying indoors for that ceremony. Another way to look at it is some families say that it's also convening of the sun, the moon, and the earth in an intimate relationship. So another way of understanding it is they say that, you know, you wouldn't want to see someone like in your family having intimacy, so you don't look at it. And that's another way our families teach the children to not look at an eclipse, whether it be solar or lunar eclipse. So that's just a little bit on that. There's a whole lot more I could share and talk about, but I want to go ahead and move forward from here. In our stories, there's actually one story before this that we talk about. We call it the shoe game. And that's a story of when the animals had to play a game to decide whether it should be daylight or darkness at all times. And that's also a winter story and a game that takes place amongst our people. But in short, nobody won that game, and that's why we still have equal day and night amongst our people. After that, it's when the sun and the moon were created from those crystal quartz. And then the sun and the moon were created. And the last thing I'll share with the sun and the moon is that because of the duties of carrying these heavy crystals across the sky, the sunberry and the moonberry did say every time they set in the west, every time that they set, they said that they spend so much energy carrying that crystal that they need to be replenished with new energy. So they say that every time they set, someone here on earth will stop breathing and their life will be given up to give energy to the sun and the moon to be carried across the sky the next day or the next night. So that's another view that we have as Navajo people. After the story of the sun and the moon, we move into the story of the stars. And again, this is another winter story that takes place talking about the coyote. We call him Ma'i. And we call these Ma'i Chotloshe, the coyote stories of winter. And he's a prominent being and figure amongst our stories and our culture and our emergence, and still very important for our people today, that songs and ceremonies are created from or by or for the coyote. And one of those important stories is the story of the coyote and stars. Also a winter story, so I can't share it in full, but in short, the leftover crystal chips from the creation of the sun and the moon were actually gathered up and stored away by one of our deities who we call the Black God, Hash'ejin. And later on, after many years, I guess you could say, of just having the sun and the moon, they decided to create another they decided to create another way to remind our people, the five-fingered people, of how to live in this world. Set reminders for seasonal events, set reminders for ceremonies, set reminders for our people to live by, to remind our people of their roles and their responsibility as five-fingered beings. So that's when they decided to create images in the night sky using those leftover crystal chips by creating them into constellations, into stars. And the holy beings were doing this in a very ceremonial state. They were taking their time and they were patient with creating these different images and the stories that would be set into each of these constellations. And as they were doing so, all the deities who were present were also on board of not letting the coyote know about what was happening, because his mischievous acts, the coyote might tamper or ruin the process that they had in place. But it is a coyote story because the coyote did find the home of Black God and saw what was happening, and eventually it led to the coyote scattering all the crystal quartz chips across the night sky because he was impatient and his curiosities led him to that Hogan, and eventually he stopped the creation of the constellations and he threw all the leftover crystal quartz into the night sky, creating what we now see as the night sky with the billions of stars in our viewpoint. And the bulk of that is what we now call Yakai Staha, which is the Milky Way. And that is the direction that the blanket of crystal quartz was thrown. And that's how all the stars got scattered across the night sky. This is a very fun story to tell in the wintertime. I love sharing this with the kids and getting interactive and sharing this story. But because it is now April, that's as much as I can share for this particular story. But I want to move on to just talk about some of these constellations that were created before the coyotes scattered the other carts across the sky. Three of the main constellations are three constellations that we can see throughout the night sky. just about anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. And it definitely can be seen from Navajo land. The one star that many of us identify as the North Star, also known as Polaris. This is a star that doesn't move in our vantage point. And because it doesn't move, it's known as the North Star. And it's known as the center of the night sky from the Navajo perspective. And all the other stars revolve around this one star. So in Navajo, we call that revolving motion in the night sky as nahokos. And nahokos is also the Navajo word for the direction of north. And this one star that doesn't move, we call it in our language nahokos bekon, which would translate in English as the revolving fire. It actually doesn't revolve, but everything else revolves around this fireplace. And that's how we would actually see it as Navajo people. The North Star is the fireplace. If we were to look at a Navajo home, if we were to look at indigenous homes that are round, such as the hogan or the teepee or a kiva, and many times the fireplace is going to be in the center of that home and everything revolves around it. And that's how we see that North Star in the night sky. And then on opposite sides of this star are going to be two constellations. One of them, many of us know it as Ursa Major or the Big Dipper. And the Big Dipper on this image here is the one on the right. And we call it Nahokos Bakani. Again, Nahokos is that north direction, which is defined as revolving. And Bakani is a Navajo word we use in gender to identify the male or the men. So Nahokos Bakani would be translated as the male revolving one, or the man of the night sky. And he is a representation of men amongst earth. He is a symbol of warriorship. He's a symbol of fatherhood. He's a reminder to all of our men folks here on earth of the responsibilities and the roles of being a man, of being a father, of being a caretaker of the home, of being a provider, carrying and instilling stories, prayers, and ceremonies to the children, and teaching the children how to be strong mentally, physically, emotionally, how to hunt, how to take care of a home, and so forth. And that's what he stands for in the night sky. On the opposite side of the night sky from the fireplace is going to be another constellation we know today as Cassiopeia. And that's going to be the 5 bright stars that make the W shape. These two constellations, Cassiopeia and Ursa Major, are never together. And that's because there's a fine definition in our stories that separate men and women. And more so in the roles and responsibilities in our stories, understanding that there are only some things men can do and some things only women can do. For example, women are the bearers of life. They bring life into this world, and men cannot do that. So because of that, they're on opposite sides of this fire. And Cassiopeia in our language is Nahokos Ba'adi. Ba'adi would reference the female. So the female revolving one, or the mother of the night sky, is another way that we see Cassiopeia. And that's the image we have here on the left. And she is a symbol of our women. She's a reminder to our women of the roles and responsibilities of motherhood, sisterhood, what it means to be a sister, a mother, a grandmother, an auntie, being the first to instill love, compassion to our children and bringing life into this world, being the first teachers of our children, and teaching them how to talk, how to walk, how to love, how to care for one another, how to cook, how to take care of themselves inside the home in a protected space. And that's what she represents for our people. Nahokos Ba'adi. So these are 3 important constellations we can see almost every night from our vantage point here in Navajo land. The next one I want to talk about is another prominent constellation we can see throughout the northern hemisphere and parts of the southern hemisphere. And we call this constellation Orion. That's what many of us know it as. And we know it as Orion's belt, the 3 stars in the center. And in our stories, we call it the first slender one. And he is a warrior of the night sky. He is a hunter, and he reminds our people, especially the young men and the young women, of what it means to be a warrior in this world, how to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, how to have prayers, how to make offerings, how to move about this world, in this world as a hunter and as a warrior, to take care of yourself and to provide for yourself. And in hunting and warriorship's teachings don't just apply to the field of becoming a warrior or a fighter or a hunter, but learning how to navigate in this world. What does it mean to be a warrior today in 2004? To navigate through the different challenges and obstacles we have as 5-fingered people. Those are the motivation that he instills in us, that he shows us to become warriors and leaders in that way. So that's what he represents to us in the night sky. This one here is one of the constellations that we typically don't see in the same time as we see Orion. So Orion is more prominent in the winter. This constellation is more prominent in the summer. And I always get it confused in the English terms, but I think it's Scorpius. And this constellation's in the southern hemisphere from our vantage point. And we identify him as Atse Atso, which is the first big one. And he represents and honors all of our elders, the knowledge and wisdom holders of our people. So in here, we can imagine him holding a basket, and the basket is filled with all the knowledge, experiences, and understanding of this world. And he shares that knowledge and understanding with us and reminds us to take care of our elders, to listen to our elders, respect their elders and their experiences and their stories and their teachings. Listen to them so that we can utilize it to better ourselves. And it's a reflection of hope and those teachings that we have in our language of Sihasin, which essentially means hope in the English language. So that's what Atso represents. One last constellation I want to share before I get ready to close out here is the constellation we call in our language as Dilyehe. And Dilyehe is known as Pleiades, or the 7 sisters, or the 7 brothers, depending on the stories that are out there. And in our stories, Dilyehe, or Pleiades, is a very important constellation that we watch throughout the year. It's a story of 7 naughty boys that like to destroy cornfields. They are a symbol that we watch for planting season. And that's where the term Dilyehe is coming from. It's deriving from the Navajo word of Itilye, which translates to farming, planting. So we watch Dilyehe, or Pleiades, throughout the year as it appears in certain parts of the night sky in the spring and fall. In the winter time, Dilyehe, or in the fall winter time, Dilyehe is a reminder for us to stop our summer ceremonies and to begin our winter ceremonies. And this will usually happen in the fall when Dilyehe begins to appear in the eastern horizon right after sunset. And then there's a time in the spring when this constellation is disappearing from our viewpoint. And when that time comes, that is when we have planting season. So we're coming upon that time now where Pleiades will not be in view on Navajo land. And for about 4 or 5 weeks, it'll be disappearing from our viewpoint. And that is when we have planting season here. That's when we put our seeds into the earth. It's said that if you plant while this constellation is still out in the early spring, these 7 naughty boys will come around and dig up your seeds, or they're going to send freezing temperatures so that our crops will not grow. If you plant when they return, they're going to stop the rains from coming. They're going to make the winds blow harder. They're going to dry up the field so that our plants won't produce crop. So that's part of our stories that we have with this constellation. Again, we have many other constellations that exist out there, many stories that are tied to many of these constellations. But I just want to share those as a quick introduction with each of you, and shift a little bit to talk about where I'm coming from today, which is Canyon de Chelly. And Canyon de Chelly, as I mentioned when we were looking at the map, is kind of in the center of Navajo land. And Canyon de Chelly, or Tseya, is kind of the center of many of our stories and ceremonies. It was a place of refuge. It's considered the last stronghold of the Navajo people during times of conflict with the U.S. military and the Spanish. And this is one of the reasons why our people are still here, is because of the Treaty of 1868, which was centered around Canyon de Chelly. And Canyon de Chelly is a place that has been a home for over thousands of years to indigenous people, especially for us as Navajo people. And we have evidence on the canyon walls of the many different groups that have come through, including Navajo people. We have different forms of rock art, pictographs, and petroglyphs, some dating back 5,000 years, some as far back as 10,000 years. But it's on these walls that we're also reminded of some of these stories and these teachings that I shared with you earlier today. And some of these lead us to different areas in the canyons, such as caves and alcoves. One of the amazing things that Canyon de Chelly has is a large collection of what we would call planetariums today. Navajo people have always observed the night sky, and we've documented it in many different forms in our sand paintings, in our prayers and ceremonies, and even on the rock walls. So we have alcoves like this here. When we look underneath these alcoves in the ceilings, you can see some small black marks. And as we get closer and we look underneath these alcoves, we start to see these different marks of crosses and plus signs, strikes or circles. And these are actual marks representing the night sky. These are symbols of the stars and different constellations that our people have observed over hundreds, thousands of years, and documented them on these walls for our people to still understand and make reference to and make connection through our stories and our ceremonies. So the night sky has been very important for the Navajo people, and I'm sure it has been for many indigenous people around the world for thousands of years. But in Canyon de Chelly, we have reference of those, and our people have observed the different constellations throughout many different seasons and years. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, and if you were to look up and watch Polaris, and if you were to watch Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, if you were to choose 4 days throughout the year to look and mark where this constellation is, it would look like this in the night sky. You can see the 4 different areas that it would be situated in throughout the year. And as you look closely, it creates a symbol. And I do apologize for those who might have a different reaction to the symbol. But I want to share and end on this note that this symbol here is actually a very important symbol for us as Navajo people for various different reasons. And it's stemming from part of this observation we make of the night sky. And in our language, it's a symbol that we call Tsenayo Etle, which is the whirling logs. And the whirling logs is this symbol of a cross that moves out from the center going clockwise, or it comes out and goes inward. And it's a symbol of life. It's a symbol of seasonal cycles. It's a symbol of moving forward. It's a symbol of healing for our people. And we still see many of these notions, symbols referenced on the canyon walls. We see them in our sand paintings and our ceremonies. We see them in our baskets and our weavings of rugs. And it's a symbol that is coming back amongst our people today for this purpose of understanding how we as Navajo people understand the world around us, understanding our place as five-fingered people, and understanding what this symbol means to us. So I just wanted to share this much. There's a whole lot more I could share, but with the time allotted, and I want to allow at least some time for some questions and comments. I want to say ahiaha to each of you who are tuned in. I want to apologize once again for being a little late, but we were able to get through to this point. So thank you for everyone who's tuned in, for listening. I hope I've been able to share just a little bit of some of our perspectives, help you guys understand just a little bit more of the Navajo worldview. So at this time, I will stop sharing and we will open it up for some questions and answers, Chris.
Thanks very much, Ravis. That was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot from that, being up here in the plains, not interacting with Navajo Nation much. That was fantastic and really, really opened my mind about some things, about how we interact with the world around us. So, folks, before we do take questions, I just want to remind you we do have some other talks coming up this week. If you want to check those out on idsw.darksky.org. Otherwise, you can check those out on our YouTube channel. I saw the link go out in the chat in just a bit ago. With that, we'll jump into the questions here, and please do feel free to keep submitting them. Even if we don't get to it, we'll try to give you a response after our live event. Yeah, the first question here, someone has a project that they are starting that shares the native constellations. They're an astrophotographer and would like to outline the constellations and their names for the tribes of the native lands that they photograph. When photographing places like Monument Valley, would love to share more constellations. Is there a good avenue to get this information to share? In short, this person's wondering, are we allowed to share the Navajo constellations with others? And maybe where could they learn more, or where is there a good place to learn in person?
That's a very great question, and it's not a very easy one to answer. I can only speak on behalf of the Navajo people. And I will say that first off, if it's going to be like big projects like that or some sort of research, it's always important to go directly through the tribal avenues and recognize that each one of these different tribal groups are sovereign nations and they have their own way of running their own government and culture. And sometimes these different tribes don't just allow anyone to come in and start doing research or taking recordings of such things. So it's best to go through them. Many of the tribes have what we call TIPOs, or Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. That would be a great place to start, especially if you're just wanting to know if it's okay, a yes or no, to do that type of work with that group. But as far as sharing the knowledge amongst, or from the Navajo perspective, there is one great book out there. It's called I think it's Sharing the Skies or something of that regards. And everything in that book, as I understand it, was approved by the Navajo Nation. It was written and created by Navajo practitioners and other professors. So everything in that book, if it's coming from that book, you're allowed to utilize it. But just be mindful of always crediting where the stories are coming from. And just understand, like I shared, there's different perspectives, even amongst Navajo people. So what I shared with you today is only one perspective. Another family or individual from the Western Navajo land or the Eastern Navajo land might also have a different story. And sometimes they might be similar or they might contradict each other. But I'll leave it there for that question.
Wonderful. Thank you. It looks like even somebody in the chat shared that Sharing the Skies by David Begay and Nancy Maryboy. Wonderful. Yep. I knew that would come up in the chat. Thanks, folks. Most well-intended group out there. Here's the next question. Can you repeat again the final, what you called the final symbol in English? Whirling?
So in Navajo, it's called Tsenayo Esle, which would translate to the whirling logs or the twirling logs.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Here's the next question. Yeah, this little existential on this one, but what would be the meaning to the Navajo of losing access to the night sky as a result of light pollution?
Ooh, that's a big, big, big question with a very big answer. Um, I would love to talk with you more about it later, if you wanted to reach out to me. But one of them is definitely when it comes to our ceremonies and the natural order that we have here in this world, living with the different animals and the plant beings, they're also going to be affected by us, and not just the human beings as well. I mean, we're already starting to see some of those changes. Um, Growing up on Navajo land, I grew up without running water and electricity. I grew up, even in high school, doing some homework by kerosene lamp, and being able to not be afraid of the dark and be outside was a very opportune time for me to grow and live. And I see that today, a lot of these places that didn't have electricity now have electricity. As I look up from my home down throughout the valley in Chinle, 20 years ago when I was a kid, there might have only been 100 orange street lights. Now, when I look over the hill, there's thousands of orange street lights, just all across the valley. And it definitely disconnects us and our generation, our younger generations, from the natural world that exists around us. Um, and it will have great effects in the future in sharing stories and also having ceremonies, and having that connection to the stars, to the sun, the moon, and all of that. But I'll share that much to that question.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to echo a lot of the comments coming in is just overwhelming. Thank you, Ravis, for sharing these stories. Just fascinating insight. Um, so the next question we'll go to okay, I'm trying to understand this one. Did the Navajo identify the same groups of stars for constellation as other familiar ones? Okay. Okay, I get it. Can I clarify that for you at all?
Yeah, I think I get the question. And yes, there are some constellations out there that are the same. For example, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Orion. Those are all, I think, prominent constellations you can see in many different cultures around the world make connection to, just as we do. Then there are constellations out there that are, I guess, Navajo specific, that don't really have a connection to other stories around the world, or sometimes our constellation, or our story might include the entire nighttime view. For example, the what we call the Thunderbird, or Diné, is a constellation that, this time of the year eventually would take the entire night sky. Um, that's how large that constellation is, and it actually merges different constellations into one. Um, so yes, there are some that we share amongst other tribes and cultures, at least as the same constellation, but maybe a different story or a similar story. And then there are some that are specific to Navajo culture.
Sure. Yeah, I know there's some similarity in some of the animals as well, just by happenstance, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, and folks, if you do have any other questions, feel free to submit those. Ravis, I know you did mention if people did want to get involved and contact you directly, would that be okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine. I will actually jump in the chat really quick, and I will put email addresses down for people.
Wonderful.
So there are two different email addresses that I'm going to put in. The first one is going to be, directly with the National Park Service. So anything educational, anything about Canyon de Chelly, you can email me directly there. If it's specifically about Navajo culture, and just the Navajo perspectives, and then you can email me directly, on my Gmail account, my Gmail here. So both of those emails are good ways to contact me.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. I'm sure our folks will be in touch. That's just amazing. Yeah, I think we'll just end it by giving Ravis, if you want to leave us with a lasting impression, a key takeaway, or as we finish out International Dark Sky Week coming up on the eclipse or otherwise, what's something you just want to leave us with today?
One of the most important things is to just remind everyone that there are many, many different ways to view this world and to live in this world. There's not one correct way. There's not a wrong way. And the Navajo perspective is just one of thousands of different connections that we have in this world as five-fingered people. In Navajo, we identify ourselves strictly as Nihoka Diné, which translates to the five-fingered spiritual beings on this earth. And that represents all human beings. Every single one of you on this call is a part of that term. And in short, that's a term given to us by our deities to remind us as we are the caretakers of this world. We are the ones to ensure that this world continues to be balanced and harmonious for us to live in today, and to ensure that our children, grandchildren, and their grandchildren are going to have an opportunity to live in this beautiful world as well, with all the resources we need, from clean air, clean water, to the night sky, to the dirt, to the water, everything. So we want to make sure that we live that life so that our children and grandchildren, their grandchildren, have the opportunity to hear these stories, to live these stories, and to be a part of this world too. So I'll leave on that note. Once again, thank you very much for allowing me this time.
Thank you, Ravis. And thanks everybody for joining today. That was such an awesome presentation. We really do appreciate your time. And folks, we appreciate your time calling in from home or out abroad. Be sure to check us out tomorrow, same time, for our Night Matters talk with Mark Job, astrophotographer, or on Sunday with Kat Kennedy. Feel free to check us out, darksky.org, or for all your International Dark Sky Week needs at idsw.darksky.org. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, we're out there. Thanks again, Ravis. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.